Good evening, everyone. Thanks for your patience as we get up and running this evening. Glad you're here and can join us tonight on this rainy kind of Thursday, right? Okay. It's been one of those weeks. My name is Paula Knutson, and I have the privilege of serving as the Vice President for Student Affairs. And I want to tell you, I think we've spent the last about 6 to 8 months engaging in what this night might look like. And I think you're in for a treat. We have some history that really hasn't been disclosed at UNI for some time. And we also have some storytelling that's going to happen over the evening. So I think what we'd like to do during LGBT History Month is acknowledge that we're growing, we do better, we still have more growth to go, but I think that we can learn lessons from our past, learn lessons from our history that hopefully will help us move forward and continue to make that progress around LGBT plus issues and inclusivity at UNI and beyond. So we're going to start off tonight providing you a little bit of history about what was occurring around the 1960s in UNI's history and across the country. And then we're going to go into some storytelling. As we have time, we'll do a little Q&A. And we do have some microphones at the front of the room. We'll be inviting you to do that. And then we'll end with just a brief presentation for Tim Sullivan, who's been we've been blessed to have join us for the last 2 days on campus. So I'm going to start off. I met David Hayes about a year ago, I think, and learning about our LGBT history and a little bit about the Cedar Valley area around the topics. And so I asked Dave to provide some backdrop because there's a level of secrecy in the 60s that occurred around LGBT, and keep in mind those terms weren't even known back in the 60s. So I think the context is really going to help you enjoy Tim's journey and his story along the way. So David Hayes, he's active in the local LGBT community since 1976. Dave Hayes worked at the UNI public radio stations from 1979 to 2004. As a staff member, he was involved with the UNI Gay Lesbian Outreach student group. He helped organize UNI's Intro to Gay and Lesbian Studies classes in the 1990s and was involved in campus-wide effort to change administrative policy, adding sexual orientation and gender identity to the Civil Rights Statement in 1992. He is a hobby historian by his own definition and believes that if we don't learn the lessons of past generations, we may be forced to repeat them. Please help me welcome Dave Hayes.
Thank you, especially to the university and President Nook and Vice President Knutson for this opportunity to share some of our history. And to Emily Harsh from the Gender and Sexuality Services for organizing these events throughout the month, LGBTQ History Month. Life on campus for LGBTQ people, students, faculty, and staff has dramatically changed in the last few decades. I've been researching the history of the local LGBT community for a number of years, and as I worked on campus for 25 years, I watched the struggles of LGBT people who just wanted a safe place to live, work, and learn, but were too often met with ignorance, hatred, and sometimes violence. Our more recent history is built on some dramatic conflicts of a couple of turbulent decades. That period started shortly after the 1969 Stonewall riots in New York City, which sent ripples of revolt across this country's gay community. By 1971, the University of Iowa had the first recognized campus gay rights organization in the U.S., and by 1972 and 75, the first attempts at establishing a chapter at UNI of the Gay Liberation Front failed. It was not until 1981 that a gay lesbian support group took root here. Over the next 10 years, the UNI Gay Lesbian Outreach, or UNIGLOW, as it was known to almost everybody on campus, floundered and was reborn several times. often sparking outrage on campus while trying to educate both students and faculty on the many issues and hardships being faced. After years of heated debate, UNI did add sexual orientation and gender identity to the non-discrimination statements in December of 1992. Since then, that student group has become known as UNI Proud, and the LGBTQ Resource Center was added to Mocker Union as part of the UNI Gender Sexuality Services. Today, over 500 UNI students openly identify as LGBTQ, but there are likely many more. Looking back at those early struggles for gay liberation, most of today's students can't imagine why there was a need for a liberation. From what? Tonight, we remember some of what those of us in the LGBT community were fighting for and why. A secretive life in the shadows was led by LGBT people here at the then Iowa State Teachers College. By the 1960s, this campus had grown to be known as the State College of Iowa, then UNI. With that growth came diversity, but not acceptance of that diversity. We lived double lives, keeping secrets and often telling lies because it was simply too dangerous to be open as an LGBT person on campus or even in Iowa. There was the perfect storm of national and state conditions and events. Homosexuality was listed by the American Psychiatric Association as a treatable disorder until 1973, and the American Medical Association had a list of viable therapies until 1994, which included drug and electroshock therapy for conversion and lobotomies. Movies and televisions had strict guidelines forbidding any positive portrayal of homosexuality under the Hollywood Motion Picture Production Code. The congressional hearings of U.S. Senator Joseph McCarthy turned a national spotlight on his fight to uncover an imaginary homosexual takeover of the government and military. The FBI, under the direction of J. Edgar Hoover, began keeping files on suspected gay men using surveillance, postal inspection, and phone tapping. Every state had sex crime and sodomy laws, criminalizing any sexual activity that could not result in pregnancy. In Iowa, sodomy was a felony punishable by up to 10 years in prison, with repeat offenders or those labeled sexual perverts eligible for sterilization. Homophobia, in its truest sense, became institutionalized, leading to police raids, entrapment, harassment, and a sense of public panic and suspicion. LGBT people were driven further underground, living double lives and lies. For those of us growing up under these conditions, we often suffered poor self-esteem, depression, and anxiety, often turning to alcohol, drugs, and unhealthy relationships, even turning to heterosexual marriage in an attempt to be accepted by society. A coded language developed, often switching pronouns, using nicknames of the opposite gender, and a wordless communication of secretive symbols. Following the 1954 abduction and murder of a young boy in Sioux City, police followed the stereotypical theory that it must have been a gay man, so they found one in the neighborhood. Before going before a judge, he went to the nearest state mental health institute, an MHI in Cherokee, to begin electroshock treatments which destroyed parts of his memory, and then was given heavy drug treatment, including the new medication of the day called LSD. He then agreed to sign a confession and spent 17 years in prison before evidence of his drugged confession was uncovered and the case was thrown out. But that set up a 1955 law. The newspapers covering this abduction and murder and the arrest of a gay man took that news statewide, and everyone cheered. They cheered for his capture, his conviction, and within weeks, the Iowa legislature passed in 1955 what was dubbed the Sexual Psychopath Law, enabling law enforcement to round up gay men with no charges filed as a preventative measure to possible future crimes. This forced gay men into conversion treatment at a state MHI or imprisonment if tried for crimes against nature. In Sioux City, 2 gay roundups, or as the local police called it, fruit picking, resulted in 35 men being arrested in 1955 and 58. In Waterloo, the local sheriff arrested 25 men in 1960. The lucky ones fled the state. I began researching UNI's LGBT history after a former student who was a friend came to me with information about the removal of gay men from campus in the 1960s. What I was told has been confirmed in part by vague references in the Northern Iowan and its predecessor, the College Eye. In 1964, a new administrator who arrived from the University of Alaska was appalled to learn that there was an underground gay life at this school, known for training Iowa's teachers. Using the weapons of Iowa law, from 1965 to 67, he quietly conducted a purge of gay and bisexual men from the school, giving them the choice to leave or face having their names turned over to local law enforcement for processing. For those who escaped the purge, faculty advisors recommended that the state of Iowa not issue teaching certificates to any education major suspected of being gay. Student spies were sent to private parties off campus to collect names, and those named were pressured to name more. There was an attempt to report this in the school paper, but the stories were censored by the faculty advisor. And that became the bigger issue for debate on campus, censorship of the press. People fought for the freedom of the press, but not for the liberation of a few queers. Confirming pieces to this story of the gay purge can still be found in letters to the editor from that era, but there was no documentation of it in official records. Today we have only a few oral histories. My friend told me that the purge ended suddenly in 1967 when one of the grad students added to the purge list was a legislator from Des Moines who was taking summer classes. To this day, it is not known how many men were forced to leave. Until recently, no names were known. Now we can hear the story of Tim Sullivan, who was among the first to go in 1965.
Thank you, Dave. It's always good to know our history. As it's been pointed out, if we don't know our history, we are apt to repeat our many mistakes. It is my pleasure to introduce tonight's keynote speaker, Timothy Sullivan. Tim attended what was then Iowa State Teachers College from 1963 to 1965, the tumultuous period for gay men on this campus, as you just heard. He was raised in West Union, Iowa, one of 2 children in the family. Tim's brother, Terry, is here with us this evening and is an alumnus of UNI, and the reason that Tim is here tonight. Also joining Tim on stage is his partner of 43 years, Alton. Actually, Alton isn't on stage, and couldn't make it yet tonight. In the fall of 1965, Tim was asked to leave the university or tell his parents he was gay and receive medical treatment. Tim chose to leave the university and move to California with a friend. Tim has over 30 years of experience in men's, women's, and children's fashion apparel, as well as home furnishings, giftware, and floor coverings. As a visual merchant and store designer, Tim specified floor design projects and for stores including Brooks Brothers, Levi Strauss & Company, and other major retailers. Tim has received numerous awards. He's named Store of the Year by Chain Store Age magazine for the original Levi Strauss store at 57th Street and 5th Avenue in New York City. Store of the Year Grand Prize Award by the National Association of Store Fixture Manufacturers for the Docker Shop in Cambridge Galleria, Cambridge, Massachusetts. His work has been featured in the covers of Visual Merchandising and Store Design magazine and the Retail Store Image magazine. He has received the Store of the Year honors 8 times and has 6 hardcover books. Members of the National Retail Federation's Visual Merchandising Advisory Board have asked him to, he serves as a member of the National Retail Foundation's Visual Merchandising Advisory Board. Tonight, we have the honor of hearing from Tim and learning from his amazing journey. Please join me in welcoming back to the University of Northern Iowa, Tim Sullivan.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, my heart's in my throat right now. So, this is the most fantastic thing that's ever happened in my life. I'm absolutely stunned. My brother went to his 50th college reunion last fall, and he met Dr. Lisa Boranio, and she told her what had happened to me back in 1965. And she was pretty appalled, I understand, and she began to talk to Dr. Knudsen shortly after that. And all of this started to happen because people were interested in this story. And it is a story, and I was devastated when that happened. I really did. I loved it here then. It was a much different place, much, much smaller. I was in Ryder Hall. Ryder Hall was considered Siberia because the only place we could eat was in what's now 23rd Street thing. That was it. And Ryder Hall in the winter, all the way over there to eat breakfast was really unpleasant. It was pretty hard. Anyway, it was funny because what I see now in this campus, which is absolutely spectacular, there were cornfields there when I was here. None of this existed. And I'm so impressed with the people that I've met and the things that I've heard about the school and all of the disciplines you have here that never existed in 1963. And you have to remember how different it was. Well, you maybe can't imagine how different it was. There were 3 television channels. That was it. There's no internet. My parents' phone number was 82. Yeah. It's a different world. And, today, I just want to talk about this word gay. It's an old word. It goes back to the beginning of the 20th century. And I was fortunate to know some gay men who were many years my senior. And their life was even worse than it was for those of us who came along a little bit later. There was unless you lived in a big city, if you lived in a small town like I grew up in, and probably many of you did, there was nothing, no support, there was no knowledge of anything. Nobody knew the word gay. It was a code word still. Even when I first came here, I started learning that word and finding out what homosexuality meant. When I was growing up in West Union, and because we didn't have the resources that we all have now, we can go on the internet and we can find out all about gay life and how it's been and how it's going to be and the things that are bad and the things that are good and all the things we've accomplished and so much more left to do. Back then, there were no resources. I remember that I was in probably sophomore or maybe a junior in high school, and Life magazine published a article about gay men in LA and in Chicago, I believe it was. And they were talking about things, well, you can always spot one, like, be careful, they have germs or cooties or something. You can spot one because they all wear Italian loafers and fluffy sweaters. And I, wait a minute, I wear Italian loafers and fluffy sweaters. Is that me? I mean, that's me. I just found out who I was, just like that from a Life magazine. And I'm going to tell you, it was not a flattering article. It was very, very, very nasty. I mean, we were spoken of as absolute vermin. That's just an example of what we're still going through, but we've made a lot of progress anyway. It was a difficult time. When I came here, I loved it. I was interested in theater. I was interested in art. I didn't quite know which one I was going to major in, but I kind of drifted towards the theater department, and it was great because there were some people there who were older than I was, so, 20, 21 maybe 22. Well, when you're 18, 21, and 22, it's kind of older because they've had more experience, and some of them came from bigger towns. West Union had 2,500 people. Cedar Rapids, I met people from Waterloo, from Sioux City, from bigger cities where you meet a wider variety than you do in a town like St. Louis. And they accepted me right away. And, they treated me like an equal. They used to take me to movies I was too young to see. You had to be 21. They lied. But I got to see the movies. First time I ever saw a foreign film. And some of these people were really wonderful. And I worked on a lot of plays in the old theaters. What's Lang? Is that Lang? That theater over there, that was the only one. And I was working in that one. We did The Skin of Our Teeth. I'm listed as the technical director. That was the slideshow. That was what? Anyway, but I had a wonderful time with them, and I hung out in the green room all the time, and these people treated me like an equal, and I started learning things, and felt like I was being more sophisticated and all this and that. So I loved it here, and I was devastated when I got that letter. Now, obviously, in 1965, your parents, my parents, your parents are much. You're probably older than your grandparents, but. Nowadays, then the word gay wasn't known. Homosexual in small towns in Iowa, I don't think it was even known. I don't even think heterosexual was known as a word in small towns in Iowa, where I grew up. So how was I going to tell them? I couldn't tell them anything. And I had a friend, it was a boyfriend at the time. We didn't use that word. We never used that word, boyfriend, but it's common now. He was a barber on the hill, the same barber shop that's still there. And he said, well, why don't we go to California? I said, well, okay, why not? I got nothing here. I can't stay here. I can't stay with my parents. I don't want to be in West Union. So we, in those days, you could drive a car, someone's car, if they wanted to transfer it to one coast to the other, they would pay you to drive it. So we did that. We went to Chicago when we got there. I think it was a white Pontiac, and we drove across country to L.A. And in those days, you may have heard the old, get your kicks on Route 66. That Route 66 still existed, and it was really a circus. It was very funny. There's like a snake farm every 10 miles, and then a dinosaur show every 15 miles. It was very weird. So we traveled all that way, and we finally got the border of California, and we drove through Needles. Has anyone ever been to Needles, California? Don't go. It's horrible. I said, I came all the way out here for this? No. Anyway, we went on, and we got to L.A., and we went to West Hollywood. And West Hollywood then, as now, is a very large gay population. And I had some friends here in college who were, well, we didn't know what we were because we didn't have the information. But I had my good friend Mike Phipps. Mike was tall and thin and wore a beard. Nobody wore a beard in 1963. And then I had Dick Simpson. Dick Simpson was a sweetheart, he really was. But he acted like most people imagine gay men are supposed to be, kind of flighty and kind of a sissy. When I got to L.A. and West Hollywood, I met all these men who were just like the guys I used to idolize here on campus. The hot guys, the football players. I went, hey, there's nothing wrong with me. This is great, and I was really happy I went. But I didn't want to have to do that, but I did, and it was interesting. And the thing that happened, Jerry, who was the barber, he disappeared very quickly. Drugs. He got very much into drugs, and that was in the 60s. By then it was 1966. I had to wait until I was 21 in 1966 to be able to do that car trip. You had to be an adult, a fully adult, not an 18-year-old, but a 21-year-old. He got into drugs and he disappeared. But I had met another friend, a young guy. It was not a romantic, it was a purely platonical, what's the word I want? Anyway, it wasn't a sexual relationship. He taught me a lot. He was very streetwise, much more than me. And he grew up in LA, actually. And we started doing things. We, went to the bars. I started meeting other people. I dated some guys. This wonderful man. He was about 28 years older than I, or about 8 years older than I was. He already had a 16-year-old son. I guess it was an accident, I think he told me, but he loved the son and this and that. And I have to go back too and tell you, backtrack just a little bit. When I first got there, I was wandering around by myself on Sunset Boulevard, and I met this attractive-looking guy. And he said, "You want to come up to my hotel room?" I said, "Well, sure. I'm really naive, okay, really naive." And I went up to the hotel room, and he raped me. Well, I had never experienced such a thing. I didn't even know that kind of sex actually existed. I had never heard of it. That's how innocent we all were. If you lived in a small town, if you grew up in New York City or Chicago or LA or San Francisco, you knew these things. We didn't here. You know what? I was fine. I said, well, I learned something. I can do this. Now I know what to do. Now I'm who I am. And it was great. And I stayed in LA for about a year and a half. And then by that time, the 60s, as we think of it, with the pot and the hippies and all that was beginning to start. And I met this guy who was very much a hippie, long hair and kind of a hippy-dippy attitude. He said, "Why don't we go to New York?" Well, since I was a little child, I really always wanted to go to New York because I loved watching, when I was a kid on television, on one of the 3 channels that we got, there was a quiz show called What's My Line? And on it were some Bennett Cerf and Dorothy Kilgallen and Arlene Francis. They were all New York society, also journalists. And they were so sophisticated and witty, and they knew things, and it seemed so fascinating. I said, I want to be like that. I want to be one of those people. So I said, okay, let's go. He wanted to hitchhike, so we did. We took acid and hitchhiked. Because it's a weird thing. When you watch snowfall on acid, it's really a trip. And then at one time we were picked up by this couple in a station wagon with 2 little kids. They didn't know what they were doing, obviously, but so we're sitting in the, and I can't remember his name, the guy I was traveling with, but we were sitting in the back seat, and the clouds, I think it was Arizona, it was all flat and kind of desert, and the clouds were doing this and doing this, and we're going, ooh, yeah, ooh, fascinating. We got as far as Albuquerque, and I said, you know what, I can't do this anymore, we're going to fly. I happen to have enough cash to get a plane ticket to New York City. And we got to New York City. I remember flying in over, if any of you have flown over a big city like Chicago or New York or LA, it's fantastic, all the lights and everything. And I thought, oh my God, what am I doing? Look at this is huge, And I said, well, I'm here. So I did, and I went. And we went down and walking up Fifth Avenue. If you know, Fifth Avenue is very fashion. It's all about fashion and high-end shopping and so forth. And we walked past, and I always loved fashion, I always loved clothes, and we were walking past a department store called Bonwit Teller. It was very high-end, it was very glamorous, lots of socialites shop there. It's now been replaced by Trump Tower, just so you know, unfortunately. Bonwit's is nicer. Lots nicer. Anyway, it was almost Christmas time, and they had a lot of formal wear for women, ball gowns. And I remember Norman Norell, he's a designer who is deceased now, of course, but he had on a mannequin, and it was a cashmere sweater, turtleneck sweater with 3/4 sleeves, but the skirt was a big, huge skirt, all bronze sequins. And I went, oh boy, I'm home. There's Arlene Francis. Arlene Francis could have worn that. I was just saying, this is great. I really loved it here. So I stayed there. I lived there for 25 years in Manhattan, and I got a job at a company called Ram Division of Genesco, and they had 3 different menswear brands. And I started there as an apprentice, and I learned how to rig the form, as we called it, when you put the form on the suit on the form, and you use cardboard and pins and all that to make it look really good. I learned how to do that, and I was very good at it. And I was mentored by a very fine man called Al Coffey, who was one of the things that Dave just spoke about. He married and had children because he was 20 years older than I was. I was 21 and he was 41. So he had been a generation earlier, and he chose to be married and have children because there were alternatives for him. He was a nice man. And I also met David Stipkovich, who is straight, and I was a junior to him at the time, and we became very, very good friends, and we still are. And he taught me a lot of things. And then he eventually, when I was at Brooksburg, he eventually worked for me on freelance projects. So, it's a long-term thing and a lot of interrelationships, and it's wonderful to have people like that who are straight, who accepted you from right from the beginning, as you were. Anyway, Brooks Brothers was my first important job, and I had at one point 30 people reporting to me around the country. If we had a store in a town that had more than one location, we would hire a freelance person, and otherwise they were full time. And I did budgets, payroll budgets, all kinds of. I'm digressing right now. We're going back to the gay thing. It was different then, but I started, and when I got to New York, as David said, the bars were raided. When you went out to a gay bar, you were risking going to jail. It was scary, but we did it anyway. The only bars that were safe were mostly attended by younger people, and they were mostly dance places, and they were all run by the mafia. The police didn't touch them. Never. Money. We got paid. So it was, we were all kicked around, as David said. It's even then, this is the mid-'60s. Stonewall, I wasn't there. I was in New York. I had a boyfriend at the time who lived out in Queens. It was about an hour subway ride. And I was out there for the weekend when Stonewall happened. And I don't know if it's generally known by a lot of people, but that was started by drag queens. They're the ones that threw the first stones. And I've respected drag queens ever since. Still do. But going back to the other thing, it has improved a great deal now. Stonewall really ended all that thing. And I'm just going to continue on about my New York experience here, because we in New York, off of Long Island on the Atlantic Ocean, there's a sandbar called Fire Island, and it's about 30 miles long and about a half a mile wide. And there were separate communities there, and there were 2 communities that were mostly gay men. One was Cherry Grove, and one was the Pines. And I started going out with my friend Robert to the Pines. Now, Pines attracted a certain type of men by this time. By this time, we're in the early 70s. A certain type of men. They were identified as kind of hyper-masculine. I mean, everybody was a bodybuilder. Everybody had a mustache. I still have it. Everybody had a mustache. Everybody worked out. Everybody took their shirt off when they were dancing. It was a great thing. We all had a wonderful time. There were wonderful parties. There were the red party, the white party, the black party, the feather party. That was a hoot. Feathers. I love feathers. Just a digression. When I was about 5, my mother's friend asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I said Betty Grable. Betty Grable, if you don't know, was a huge musical comedy star for MGM in the 40s and 50s. And all her movies had feathers and spangles, and I loved that stuff. So the feather party was really fun, anyway. But after that, and I was out there for about 11 years, so and it was a summer thing. You know, we only went out in the summer, and we rented a house, and it was on the beach, no cars allowed. Everybody had a little red wagon if you had to go to the market. You know, like a flyer, what are they, red flyer, or whatever they're called. No cars at all, and you walk to the beach. And we used to, you know, my friend Robert used to make a big punch. You would watch him, it's like this. It's all booze, you know. We'd take it to the beach. We had more friends. You want a glass? Sure. Got everybody smashed. It was fun. But one morning, I read the New York Times. My first boss, my first mentor in New York City told me, he said, always read the New York Times every day. And I don't anymore because I'm not in New York, but I have it online and I glance at it. But he said, read it every day, and I took his advice, and I'm so glad I did, because frankly, it made me a lot smarter and a lot more sophisticated than I ever was when I got there. And one morning, I used to look at it when I got to work, just before we started getting things going, and I opened the very back page of the front section, and there was a small paragraph that talked about a strange cancer that was affecting several men in LA and San Francisco. And no one understood what it was. They thought it was sarcosis sarcoma, which usually were found in older Italian men. Why Italian men, I don't know, but that was it. And that was a very ominous thing. That was a Friday, and that Friday I was going out to Fire Island for the weekend. And there's a ferry that you take, and you go across the bay, and you get off. When you get off, you're really in what is the downtown of the Pines, and there's our stores there, and there's the club, a dance club, the Pavilion, which a friend of mine was a part owner of. Usually, everybody's saying, hi, guy, blah, blah, blah. Everybody, when I got off that boat, that day their faces were so down, because everybody had read that. Everybody. And it kept getting worse. And you know, some of these beautiful men with their muscles and their mustaches, and you know, they started to get sick. You have to bear with me a little bit because it's very emotional. I lost all my friends, all of them, everyone. They all died. My partner had a textile design business, and his main client was Levi Strauss. So he was out in the West Coast where they're headquartered quite often. I'd be in New York by myself. And we used to get a magazine called New York Magazine. And that one I got, and it had thumbnails of men, thumbnails, the whole cover. And it was showing men in New York City who had died of AIDS. I knew them all, except for others who were acquaintances or friends of friends, but I knew a good almost half of them. I'm not crying now because I would like to. I really would. It was it's a bad thing. It's still a bad thing. I have two friends who are very good friends who are HIV positive, and they're doing well, and you know they're fine. But a whole generation gone, just like that. It's probably one of the worst things. That's probably one of the worst things that ever happened to me in my life. I mean, I've had other things. I've been fired. I've been broke. I was practically homeless at one point when I was in LA. But that's the worst thing. Anyway, that's what it was like then. And now I'm very concerned about young people because I read on Facebook a great deal. I'm pretty active. And I hear about young people who are not using condoms. Bareback, bareback, bareback. I hear that all the time. I'm going like, you're a fool. You're a fool. It's not cured. It's not safe. is not cured, is controlled. The two friends that I told you about, they live in Palm Springs. They're both named Todd. They take their medication. They're both 52, 53 years old. I belong to two groups on Facebook, one for gay men over 40, one for gay men over 60. And it's very interesting about those people because the guys who are in 40s, you can see they're struggling letting go of being who they were and what they were. And they're going like, well, you know, I go to the bars and I feel like I'm invisible. I'm going like, well, you're not. And the guys over 60, they have all those troubles are gone. They don't care. They're just happy they got to be 60. And I listen to these people grumbling and, you know, well, I'm getting old and I'm 40 and blah, blah. I say, oh, bullshit. I said, I have so many friends that weren't allowed to get old. That really makes me angry when I read that stuff. I let them have it. I fight back. I'm going to get an assassination attempt one of these days, I'm sure. But I'm really mad sometimes. I really am. But I just want to tell, I mean, that's really all the gay history I want to tell you. I was never in a rated bar. I got out of it. You know the rest of it. It was done. I'm going to talk to me about what and that's what I did after they kicked me out. And I'm going to tell you, honestly, it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me because it got me out of Iowa, it got me to LA, and it got me to New York, where I was supposed to be in any place, anyway. So it was great, and you know, I had a nice career there, and I have photographs. We may show them afterwards, right now, because I don't want to interrupt the narrative, because I'll lose my thought process. But I had some good successes. I've been published. I've gotten awards. I was very well known in the industry, and you know, I would go to the trade shows, and everybody say hi, 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 and we go to parties. And I went to there's a trade show in Dusseldorf. It's called Global Shop, and I went there in 2003. And I was working with a vendor there, and they were having a party, so we went to a party with them. And some guy there was buying us all beer. Over and over and over and over. And then we went out for dinner. And then we had more wine. And I've never been so drunk in my life. It was terrible. The next day, this is in Germany. It's in Dusseldorf. Okay, German, I can read a menu in Italian and French and English. German, you know, so I just go like that, point. And it came out pretty good. So I said, I can't do this. I'm so hungover, I can't do this. So I went to McDonald's. It was a lot easier. But Dusseldorf was pretty wonderful. It was great. It's a huge show, and there's one whole thing where they actually do almost complete supermarkets. And you can go there for breakfast. You know, here, you want it? Sure, you know, free breakfast. It was great. But I did that, and that was wonderful. And, you know, I got to know people in Europe, and I got to know people all over the country. And the Visual Merchandising Advisory Board, I was on that. That was when Target was still Dayton Hudson, and the director of visual merchandising, VP, had seen I had done a panel discussion at one of the trade shows in New York City, and a lot of people really appreciated it. He got me. Levi's was looking for someone to do stores for them, and he recommended me. Levi's, as you know, was basically sold to department stores, Penny, Sears, Macy's, Bloomingdale's, this and that. Levi's had opened stores in Europe, and Europe, Levi's is somewhat different than ours. It's a lot less basic, and they're tiny little stores, and they were doing millions and millions of dollars, so they tried to do it in New York, in America, in the United States. And so it was a startup, and he recommended me for the job, and I got it. And that's when I started getting the awards, the magazine covers and this and that with Levi's. And there's a lot of recognition. It was really nice, and I got recognition from Levi's. I remember we were doing the 57th Street and Fifth Avenue store. I had to make a presentation. Harry Wright and Harry was the director of construction. I was the director of visual merchandising. We had to do a presentation to the board of directors of Levi Strauss. If you don't think it wasn't stressful, it was. Powerful men. And it went over well. It was really good. And Harry, I loved Harry. He had the corniest jokes you've ever heard because He just was a corny, funny guy. But he unfortunately died a year ago. He left a widow who I know, and he left a most beautiful daughter. She just graduated from high school last year. She's absolutely gorgeous. I miss him. But anyway, digression, I did get to Levi's job, and Levi's was very good. But those stores weren't successful in America. They were only successful in tourist areas, in New York City and Seattle and San Francisco, because those are tourists, foreign tourists, not American tourists. And one of them was in New York, was 57th Street and Fifth Avenue, premium address, right across from Tiffany's. The Third Avenue one was across from Bloomingdale's, and that was the one that did all the business because that was where the foreigners shopped. They went to Bloomingdale's because Bloomingdale's is famous, and they didn't go to Tiffany's. Well, they did, but I mean, the average tourist isn't going to Tiffany's, so they did very well. Eventually, they closed all the stores, but I got the recognition, and that was great for me, so that helped. They helped with other jobs. But I'm going to go back, and I want to talk about the gay thing. For now, it's enough about what I did at work. But as I said, back then, we didn't know that much. When I was little, I knew I was different. And I'm sure some of you probably knew it too, but nobody knew what to call it then. I told you the Betty Grable story. That was fine. I liked to play with dolls. I played with dolls. And I took them to school. After Christmas, show and tell. That's what I got. I took the dolls in. Did I pay for that? Sure. Did I care? No. It was me. That was me. I knew who I was, and that's what I wanted. And these weren't baby dolls. These were all babes, okay? And if they're the right size and the right, I made hoop skirts. I love hoop skirts. I love Gone with the Wind. Great. I love it. Hoop skirts. I did that, and I took them to school, and it was, I got bullied a little bit. I got hit once in a while, but frankly, I was who I was. And I'm proud of that, and I hope more people are doing. I think more people are doing it now. I mean, I didn't care. This is who I was. And when I got to high school, it all changed. I mean, I was, high school, I was very busy. If you look at my yearbook, I'm on almost every page except the sports pages. I wasn't there. So, and it was great because, I grew up, I looked nicer, I looked better, and I was in the band, and I was in speech and drama, and I was in the chorus, and I was in, I did everything but football, baseball, basketball. And, and I also knew all the cool girls were my friends. Great asset to have in your pocket. The good girls, the pretty girls, the smart girls, it was good. So I enjoyed it a lot. It was fun. But I didn't know into this, and then to go right back to that article in the Life magazine. I started learning who I was, and I think it's easier now. I still hear stories from people who are much, much younger than me, and they've had the internet, and they've had cable television, they've had Netflix, and they've had all the things we take for granted now, and they still don't feel secure, and they still are afraid. And I feel very bad. I really do. I was afraid sometimes. There have been times when I've thought I didn't know where I was going to eat. I really didn't. I didn't know where I was going to live. There were times when I did it for money. A few times. Had to. It's life. But I did it, and I'm still here, and I'm back here and telling you all this story. This is pretty good stuff. I was really nervous. But I'm feeling pretty good now. I mean, I'm enjoying this, and I have 1,000 stories. And Alton, my partner Alton, I don't believe he's here quite yet. He's not here. I can tell you, we've been together for 43 years. I've had an absolutely wonderful life with this man. He has now experienced some dementia. And this evening, before we came here, we had some time. My brother's here, and we had time to go to dinner. And so talked to my brother and Alton and myself. We went to a little Mexican restaurant right across from the hotel. And I made a mistake and let him have a margarita. I shouldn't have done that. And we got out of there, and Terry was there, and he helped me as best he could. And Alton tends to roam off sometimes. He does it when we're at home. but in home he knows how to come back. Here he does not. So I was pretty frantic. I was pretty frantic calling Paula and calling Kim. And I say, I don't know what to do, here I can't. And my brother says, well, call 911. That's the last thing you do with my brother. You don't, he will fly into a rage, or my partner, he will fly into a rage. But, we're working on it, we're dealing with it. We have wills, I have power of attorney. I'm going to see a lawyer, see what we can do, and maybe he refuses to see a doctor or take medication. So that's why he isn't here right now. But we had a fabulous life. We did many, many things. He was much more adventurous than I was. We met on Fire Island on July 4th, 1976, Bicentennial Day, 43 years ago. And first apartment together we had was on 1825 townhouse in Greenwich Village. We had the top floor. The two owners had the bottom and the middle floor. We had an old English sheepdog named Jenny, and we had a wonderful time. At that time, the disco era was beginning, and we were very much into dancing and disco and this and that. And we had many, many friends. And the friends I told you about, who had passed, though they were all alive and vibrant then, and we all went to the same places. There was the Flamingo. Flamingo was a members-only club, and you had to go in person to apply, and you had to be one of those Fire Island guys. The discrimination sure was, but it was how it was. There were black people, there were Asian people there too, but you had a look, you had to have a certain build, and you had to have a mustache. And we belonged to that. And then another place opened up called the Saint. Huge. It was an old theater. It was a Fillmore West in San Francisco. Turned it into the Saint. That was a big draw too. Also a private club, membership club. And we all did drugs, and we all did silly things. We used to go out at 2 a.m. We made at my friend Jack's loft, and we'd order. He lived just near Chinatown, so we'd have Chinese food, and then we would get stoned, and then we'd go to the club, and we'd dance all night, and we'd find ourselves walking home sometime around 10 in the morning, going to sleep, and not getting up until late in the afternoon, if at all. It was great, and we had a good time. So we got involved with all those things, and then we started. When the AIDS crisis started to hit Fire Island, we stopped doing that with our summers because it was just too sad. And we started going to Europe. And I've always been a Francophile all my life. I love French history. My hobby is French royalty. I have on my phone. I own a bust of Marie Antoinette, life size. I have a portrait of her and her children, 7 feet tall and by 6 feet. I'm really crazy, right? And I have medallions. I just collect these things. And he took me to France. And we went there for 2 weeks. I was terrified. I really was, because they only spoke French. But I loved it because I went to Versailles right away. Went to the Louvre. Went to the Invalides where Napoleon is buried. I don't like Napoleon at all, but Napoleon is buried there, and it's pretty grand. Good place to go look at. The Louvre, the department stores, the shopping was all beautiful. We kept going back. The next year we went to Europe. We went to Rome. We went to Florence. We went to Venice. And we went to Milan. We loved them all. I have photographs of Alton and I. We were in a restaurant on the canal in Venice, and these photographers come along, and you don't think. And they take your picture, and then they want you to buy it. Well, we did, but we've got one looking at me and then one looking at him, and that's our souvenir of Venice. We went to the Lido. It was fun. We're laying on the beach, and I said, "We're on the Adriatic. Who ever thought we'd be on the beach on the Adriatic? It's great. It was wonderful to do this stuff." And then Florence was fantastic. Florence was it's like a big shopping mall. It really is. But the food is great. The museums, the Uffizi, the Pitti Palace, wonderful. And we went to Milan. Milan, not so interesting. It was bombed in World War II. A lot of it's new. It was okay. It was nice. The food is another. And the thing about Rome and Florence and Venice, it's all Italian food, but it varies slightly. As you go north, it gets somewhat different than the south. There's less red sauce and more variations. We were standing on a corner, and Giorgio Armani drove by. We got cruised by Giorgio Armani. Imagine that. Wasn't that fun? It's fantastic. Didn't stop. Anyway, so we stepped into doing this, and then we bought an apartment. We bought an apartment in Paris. It was a little thing in the Rue Saint-Martin. Rue Saint-Martin was at that time a very hot spot for young people in Paris. And it was a 5th floor walk up, and it was probably as big as a hotel room. I have photographs of it, and we loved it there, and we didn't live there. It was a pied-à-terre because with Alden's business, he was going with Levi as buyers to Paris and to Rome and other places to shop for ideas, fashion ideas, pattern ideas for textiles. So it made sense to have it there. It did. I still have the chairs we brought them back from Paris many years ago, and then we got a wild idea that we were going to buy a chateau in France, in the Loire Valley. And if you know France at all, the Loire Valley is full of famous chateaus. Chateau in French is castle, I'm sure everybody knows. Our idea was to do a bed and breakfast and market it to Americans, because Americans, on the whole, are often very intimidated by French people and by France, as I was when I first went there. I was terrified, as I said. And there were golf courses there, and then nearby is the Abbey of Fontevraud, and Richard de Lionheart, and Eleanor of Aquitaine, and Henry II are all, well, their tombs are there. We don't know if they're actually buried there anymore. But there's another tourist attraction. And we thought, and then with my history, I love French history, I was going to do tours and take frightened Americans around the Loire Valley. But Alton's textile business kind of went away because computers had come on the scene. Before, all of these patterns were hand-painted by artists. You did the hand-painting, and then you would send it to the Far East. They would weave a sample of the fabric. It would come back to buyers, and Alton would review it and decide, make any changes. If there were changes, it went back to the Far East and then came back after they had made the changes. It's a long time-consuming process. For the computer, you just push, you do your mouse, and boom, bingo, it's done. So we had to sell the chateau, and well, there it was. That dream ended. We also, before that, I should have mentioned, we were living in that place in Greenwich Village, and we bought a loft in Tribeca. Tribeca means triangle below Canal Street in New York City. And we bought the loft. It had 12-foot ceilings, about 1,250 square feet. We paid $150,000 for it. And we lived there for several years, 5, 6 years. And Jenny was still with us. And Alton would go back off to San Francisco. I'd be back home by myself, and then I would go somewhere, and he'd be home by himself. We were all there for the dog. The dog, I used to watch late movies, like there was a TV channel in New York City. Gilbert Gottfried was the host. I remember the most vivid movie I ever saw was Sorority Babes in Slime Ball Bowl-orama. Wonderful movie. You can get it on Amazon. You can. I looked it up. I can't even begin to tell you the plot. It's really weird. I love the title, Slime Ball Babes, the Sorority Babes in Slime Ball Bowl-orama. It belongs to some kind of an imp, and these, well, this terrible stereotype of sorority girls, they're always kind of mean girls, or stuck up, or rich, or, bitchy, or whatever. Anyway, they were all that, but they got their lesson learned. They did. With Slime Ball. Huh?
We want to give people a chance for a couple of questions.
Oh, yeah, sure. I'm rambling, yeah.
8:30.
Okay. Oh, it's 8:30. Oh, my God, yeah. Okay, yeah. Questions.
So at this point in time, we'd invite a couple of questions. We've got microphones up here for either David or Tim for the evening. As you can tell, Tim is quite the storyteller, And it's been wonderful getting to know him over time. And I'd just like to say thank you for sharing your partner's journey as well. That takes courage, and I know it was a tough night. And that the fact that you could come in and still share your life with the audience, I think, is truly amazing.
Oh, thanks. Thank you so much. Thank you. You know, it was a very difficult thing because he can be very, very difficult. And he's really a sweetheart. He's very, in the daytime, when I get up, I do all the cooking now. I make breakfast in the morning. He's fine. He's happy. This and that. In the middle of the day, it gets really bad when we go out, and he sees other people. And then in the evening, he's fine again. But tonight, it was just too much. You know, too much. And it's been a lot. But I would never, ever disappoint these people because I've had a wonderful year talking to them and working with them, and I wouldn't miss it for a minute. My brother says call 911. I said, well, I might have to. I don't know, but I'm just delighted to be here, and I'm happy to have been invited.
We would like to recognize you. I've been talking with Tim. He reminded me since November when we first discovered his journey through his brother Terry. And in our conversations, I've learned so much about history. Even when you start thinking you understand history, you learn so much from the personal story. Tim has spent he came in late on Tuesday night. Wednesday, he asked to see some things around campus and explored the residence halls he lived in, the theater where he loved to be during the time, and spent some time with our students, lunch, dinner, and I think everyone I've talked to has said how valuable that getting to know him was and how appreciative they are of your humor and your talents and appreciate you making the journey. The journey from California when you're in your 70s and you have dementia, you can imagine how unsettling that can be, and the one who ends up taking the brunt of it often is the very loved one who's been with you for 43 years.
Yeah.
So thank you for making the journey.
Oh, yeah.
We do have something we'd like to present. And actually, Mark, if you could come join me, President Nook. He's been in classrooms. He was in a textile classroom. He did a panel on AIDS history and shared that personal touch because you can see the many friends over time when there was fear. I came of age kind of in the 80s, and I remember the fear in small town Iowa and across the country. And to be able to be yourself and then come back to campus and share it, we are so appreciative. So we would like to offer a certificate of appreciation is hereby awarded to Timothy Sullivan from the University of Northern Iowa on this 10th day of October 2019 for sharing valuable insights, imparting wisdom, and demonstrating perseverance in the face of tough challenges. Will you please help me thank Tim Sullivan and Dave Craig for being here?
Thank you. Oh, thank you. Oh, I have to show it. There it is. Framed and everything. They're going to charge me for this on my...
Free of charge.
Yeah. No, they're going to charge me for the weight on my luggage. Yeah, but it's safe, it's easier to carry it. You know, the planes now, I haven't flown on a domestic flight in 10 years. This is a sardine can. Yeah, that was, jeez, terrible. That said, Alden, I'm going to shut up and let people ask questions. That upset Alden too. At one point, he was trying to rip the seat belts out of the seat. And the gentleman sitting on the other side was so helpful. I don't even know his name, but anyway. But please, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Well, and I believe Tim and Dave will both stay around. Are there any, if you'd like to have more of a personal conversation about the history or the journey, that they will stay around for a few minutes and you can connect with them. But please, again, help me thank Dave Hayes for the historian perspective. Sullivan for joining us all the way from California and giving us a slice of history as well as his journey through time and dealing with some of the oppressions that are still here today. Let's learn.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you.